Hello. Today we're going to be looking at William McGuffey, specifically his philosophies and his influence on historical and current national education trends. My name is John Williams, and I'm attending the School of Education at Liberty University, and that's where this video is coming from. Here are some specific objectives to look for during our video presentation today. First off, McGuffey's influence in national identity. Specifically Americanism, American pride as part of a process. Second, focus on morality, religion, and patriotism. Third, his Christian moral instruction and virtues like honesty and discipline, but specifically the fact that he is looking for Christian moral instruction is where a lot of his stuff comes from. And then lastly, the fact that he has a bit of a complex legacy in current day, and there's a bit of a resurgence as well in the homeschool and Christian school communities. First stop we have is a look at their culture and background. Starting off with that, McGuffey's readers had a widespread use in the 19th century and were actually quite popular amongst most people in the new secular school movement as it was growing at that time. He had an emphasis on morality, religion as a whole, and patriotism. So all of those were major key points that he was focusing on the cultural aspects. He was a huge influence in the national identity of America. And then a lot of this was also done through his Protestant Christian values. He believed in country, he believed in good governance, and he believed that a righteous population made for better citizens. McGuffey's philosophy on education starts off with the fact that he was a Presbyterian minister. And so this informed the majority of the work that he did going forward in that process. So it's a good thing to keep in mind. He advocated for morality and the civic benefits of a Christian society. He believed firmly that Christians in communion together would make for a better populace of governance. And considering the very nature of America at that time, that's where we stood. Is majority of it was based off of a Christian standard. He believed firmly in the values of hard work, honesty, and religious faith. If you look back into history of early America, all three of those were really defining characteristics of America. And a lot of that still is stuck in our society today as we think about it, and most foreigners, when they think about American society, if they don't think about, either the stereotypes of the fat, stupid American, or they think of us as cowboys, those that have an understanding of American general values generally associate that we are hardworking, we are honest, and we have religious nature to our business. So religiosity is a part of our daily lives. A lot of the interesting things when it comes to William McGuffey and his readers is how he used literacy and moral education simultaneously together to impact his books, or impact his readers and his students, specifically choosing works of literature and moral ideals and then pairing them together from the beginning so that he was teaching both at the same time. Another, again, as we've mentioned, is his specific promotion of virtues. Some of the primary virtues he would select would be things like honesty, as we've mentioned, integrity, and then the nature of discipline, to be able to hold oneself accountable in those things. Last thing about his general practices is that he used a narrative approach which allowed for character development. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but his narrative approach did provide a lot of benefits and allowed his work to kind of extend beyond the classroom for students to be able to think about how things approached in their own lives. When looking at his perspectives on diversity, we get a little bit of a mixed bag in current view of observing his works. If you think about it in the culture of that day, He was very inclusive. He wanted education for all, and he promoted this with Christian values, which was the prevailing culture and group of people for that day. Majority of them were Protestants, were Christians of some sort, and there were Catholics and things around, but majority of them are still in a more Protestant nature around things. There wasn't very many seculars still going on, and those people that were, shall we say, not as uh, emphasized on the godly aspect of things were probably more deists than anything else. Um, he also adapted later versions of his readers to some of the societal changes, so he wasn't alienated or he wasn't removed from the concept of change. He understood those general ideas of what was going to happen and that people change over time and new ideas are adopted over time. Lastly, his narrative approach that we've already mentioned, this encouraged diverse perspectives. As I said, this takes it out of the home or out of the classroom. So you get to see what things are like in other places. So people can bring in their personal understanding, their personal situations, into how to read through the narrative. This allows them to address those morals, as discussed, or just the activities of general piety or patriotism and how it looks in their personal lives. So looking at the critical analysis part, this is where that complex uh, aspect of modern look comes in. And a lot of this is due to his strong religious beliefs. And a lot of the content comes through with that because, again, he was a Presbyterian minister. So at current day, we're generally not as religiously minded, at least as a group and as a whole, with most of our secular works. But there was distinct cultural relevance at that time because it was still a very prominently Protestant environment at the time. Also, he had very limited overt references to women or minorities. So, as today's culture goes, most books tend to specifically mention them on a regular basis to try to increase inclusion and general diversity as an outside whole. So whereas his works were not antagonistic or restrictive of those individuals, uh, they just everybody was just mentioned openly without any problems. It wasn't necessarily explicitly meant for one group or the other, or no one was specifically meant to be included in the process. He just sought to educate people with a moral aptitude, was the concept. As we examine some of the implications and conclusions as we're closing up here, McGuffey's role in shaping the early American public education system was rather profound. The secular school system was not a bastion of abnormality or anything that sought to have a more secular or populist view as it does today. A lot of the postmodern aspect obviously hadn't come into it yet, and those philosophies were still on their way. Um, so a lot of his work was foundational for how we do things, pedagogically, how we grow as students, how we set things for smaller tasks into more complex tasks, and that's what a lot of his work did. Next, the other major aspect, especially for biblical integration, is he's a bit of a guidepost for Christian education in that. In Christian education, we're constantly seeking to increase the biblical integration on our classes, not just as a sideboard of adding verses, but more into how we teach it, the addressing of different material, doing it all from a biblical worldview, and trying to emphasize specifically what it is to be a Christian in this world, and to lead our students into that discipleship narrative as we teach, regardless of whether it be science or math. Um, we want to always do it for that addressment. And then there's a bit of a debate over the relevance of his religious moral instruction. Uh, but in the end, a lot of that really comes down to the fact of what side do you morally attest to? If you are a moralist and you wish that Education should not have any moral directives. Education shouldn't address the values or things like that that students have. It should be an amoral process. Then you're obviously not going to enjoy or like McGuffey's work. Or if you hold to different values or morals, you obviously wouldn't enjoy McGuffey's work. But for those of us that hold to Protestant Christian values still, those haven't changed since McGuffey's time, and a lot of that is still pretty staunchly associated. So for that, his works, again, have been able to grow in that process. And again, that's why you're going to see them moving more into the other sections, as we mentioned that. I just want to close out with a bit more of a talk about how McGuffey's work is getting a bit of a resurgence. So, as anybody who's in the homeschool movement or the Christian school movement, we're constantly looking for more content, more things that we can engage with, and as mentioned in the last set of slides, more biblical integration within our work. Oftentimes, we have to take secular materials and we have to integrate biblical education into them, or we take Christian educations, which occasionally might not always be up to the standards, shall we say, and have to go through that. But McGuffey's work comes from an older time where standards were pretty high, in all truth to it, and he did a very good job at addressing different concepts and things like that. So for homeschoolers, and some forms of Christian school education, McGuffey does provide a very nice background, or at least something that can be a good foundational stepping point for modern educators, and that's why we're getting to see a nice resurgence in those works. Other great benefit is, it's obviously well past its copyright dates at this point, and so you can get free versions of it online. Google. Uh, Obviously, during this project, I've downloaded several different versions of all the different readers and looked through them nice and explicitly to just have a little bit of fun with it. I didn't want to include any in this project, but uh, they're great reference points. You can always add those little things to your classes, and there's lots of great stuff for any group of individuals, regardless of whether you're teaching literacy or just general values, because any class can have those. So they make for a nice bit of added content if you need it.